Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Today with Nicole, we're going to be talking about the retirement trap. This is a very interesting concept to have a conversation around because there's so much conversation, so much thought given to quote unquote retirement. And Nelson actually puts together two full pages in his book just to address the retirement trap. And I think the reason why the retirement trap gets so much attention is, first off, people have this notion that they want to retire. I don't know that they know what that means or what that is. I think a lot of people see 65 and they say, I want to retire. I can't wait to retire. And the reason why most people want to retire because they hate what they're doing. I use the analogy, I said, are we running away from something or are we running towards something? Now, myself, people ask me, like, when you plan to retire? I'm like, never, hopefully, right? The day I retire from this world is the day I retire completely because I love what I do. And when you love something that you do, why would you retire from it?
Yeah.
Now, what I think people have a misconception is maybe it's just finding something that you're passionate about and you retire to, right? So instead of running from something, run to something. I think that's a much healthier approach to people because if you understand that you might be quote unquote in retirement longer than you're ever in the work world, then why not find something that you really love to do, work at that, and then never retire? And then because what does retirement mean? It means to be taken out of service. Who in their right mind wants to be taken out of service? I want to be of service my whole life. At least that's my passion. That's my desire.
It's like an old racehorse. What do they do with racehorses?
Right, exactly. Yep. And so do I want to be of no value when I turn 65? Absolutely not. Now, to be honest with you, am I going to do the same pace and the same level of energy that I'm doing today? I might not. I have some things that at 65 or 70, I want to start transitioning to, but it doesn't mean I want to retire. I have a passion to want to help educate and mentor young individuals about how we think about money and what we do. Setting up a school system or setting up a curriculum would be one of those things that I have. It's a big goal that I want to do, right? So these are things I want to do. Now, am I going to do that today? Working on it. Probably going to be a lot more engaged when I'm 65 than I am right now because that's more of a passion I want to kind of run to, if that makes sense. So anyhow, that is a bit of a, what they call a retirement trap. And then where did this magic number of 65 come from? Are you familiar with that, Nicole?
I wasn't familiar with that until I read this book.
Yeah. Maybe to share with the listeners kind of where it kind of came from.
Yeah. So he talks about this back somewhere in the early part of this book. He's got a section, and I know what it looks like in the book, but I'm not finding it right now. So this idea that we need to get rid of these workers to make room for new workers. And so we'll just retire them. And I had never thought about that. But then, when I started thinking about why do we think about 65 as being the age to retire? Why is that some magic number? Why does it continue? When we first started looking at Social Security and trying to get people out of the workforce, 65 was old. 65 isn't old anymore. So people are living, to 95. Why should we think that they shouldn't have to be productive or shouldn't want to be productive or need to be productive for 30 years? 30 years, right. A third of their life.
It's exactly right. So again, Otto von Bismarck was the chancellor of Prussia at the time, and he wanted to get rid of the old workers to put in new workers. It's rather interesting that we buy into this idea that government can order our lives better than we can order our lives.
We hate that. That's what
we hate it, but we buy into it.
But we accept it. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? It's just stupid. We don't want the government to tell us what to do, but yet we're buying this idea that we retire at 65 because that's when I get Social Security. And so we're being bribed to go do something maybe that we don't want to do. And so the idea was that the government was going to tell these people to get out of the workforce, and so they're quote unquote retire them. And then we can bring new people. And again, this is a very scarcity mindset. And it's sad because the scarcity mindset is never a great mindset to be in versus thinking, how can we get more productivity? How can we create future to help people from a government standpoint, get out of the way to allow people to go do what they're going to do best, which be creative, right? And they're going to create different businesses and jobs. I mean, if the government would get out of the way, most things would take care of itself. I'm a firm believer in that. All government does is muddle up the waters and then makes good things less good and makes bad things even worse. How's that?
And more expensive.
And more expensive. Exactly. But it is again, it's just the idea that government can order our lives better than we can do it. So Social Security was created for the common good. That was the whole thing, is like, that's how they sold, is that this is for the common good. Well, yeah, but when it's from the top down telling us what the common good is, how do they know what's good for you, Nicole? How do they know what's good for you, the listener? How do they know what's good for me? They don't. They know what's good for government. And that's what they go for. It's like because they want to take your money and tell you what you should be doing with it. And so that's where Social Security was kind of born out of. But that's kind of what's been used as the carrot or the stick, depending how you look at it, to get people to become unproductive after age 65 or 70. And when this was first started, just a whole side note, when they said, it was started at 62, right? So you can start getting Social Security at 62 years old. The life expectancy was like 68 or 65. So it wasn't designed to be around a lot. You weren't supposed to be around very long on this plan. But as people's lifestyle got better and medicine got better, and now people are living to 90, and we're doing life insurance policies that are done out to age 121. So there's an expectation that people will live to age 121. And so you said a third of their life, we're going to get to the point where half of their lifetime might be spent in retirement. You think about it. And it's not your whole life that you're productive and earning an income. That's only possibly 40 years. So it's actually going to be a third, 2/3 you might be in retirement of your working years. But the whole point is like, that's just a crazy number. It's an arbitrary number that never changes. And, 67, whatever it is. But it is one of those things where we as individuals have to look at and say, do I really want to have that be my goal? Or would I rather have control the banking function of my life and then control financing that I can do from a wheelchair? I can control where money goes, or if I got a project that wants to be done, I can do this from a wheelchair and say, yeah, we're going to fund this project, we're going to fund that project. And all you do is controlling the banking function. And it's just transfers of dollars. It's not physical labor.
Yeah, and Wade, as you were talking, and I'm thinking about how my first thought is you were talking about the common good. And without getting on a soapbox, I think the common good really is people being able to provide for themselves as much as possible. But, in this world, we want to have choices and make decisions, and we want to make our own decisions. And if you can set up a system like this and you have family members that are involved in the system, because it should be a family financing function, then as you get old, so let's just say you're in a wheelchair and you can't do these things. The hope is that you would have a trusted person, whether it's a family member or somebody else, that's able to pick up that function and continue it. So now you're still being self-sufficient and maintaining the autonomy to do the things that you wanted to do without having this middleman of the government or the bank or somebody else making those decisions for you.
Right. 100%. Set up a family financing system that's perpetual, that never ends. And if you do, that's where the Rockefellers come into play. That's what people of tremendous wealth have understood and done for centuries. They take a family approach, a multi-generational family approach, and it's not start and stop. It's continuously flowing. And then once it's continuously flowing, you don't have the starts and the stops to slow you down, to your point. So it should be.
I would trust my family to make a decision in my best interest much more than I would trust the government, who doesn't know anything about me and doesn't really care, to make a decision for me.
Exactly. And to that point, where are a majority of people putting their money for quote unquote retirement today? In a government sponsored plan. Does the term 401k sound familiar to anybody?
Yep.
And, Nelson in the book on page 66, in the second half of this, in the first paragraph there, he says the most dangerous thing you can do with your money is put it into a government sponsored scheme, right?
Yeah. The next paragraph too.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says when government creates a problem, read onerous taxation, and then turns around and creates an exception to the problem they created, read tax sheltered retirement plans, aren't you just a little bit suspicious that you're being manipulated? And that was something that I had never considered, had never thought about. It was like, yeah, that's a good point.
100%. So they create the problem, and then they give these exceptions to those that, again, you have to think about that. Just If you understand what's going on, you'll know what to do. Going back to that statement, do we really understand what's going on with these plans? So I'm not here to tell people to get completely out of their plans, their 401ks. I just want you to understand what's going on, is that all the government is saying is that whatever tax rate you're in today, we're going to give you, through their grace, give you the ability to not pay taxes on that until sometime down the future. And in the future, whatever the tax rate is. So do you think the tax rates in the future are going to be higher or lower than they are today?
Yeah. If you're asking me, I think they're going to be higher. But who knows, really?
Who knows, right? You can decide that for yourself. But and this is a conversation I had with he was like 32 years old, just getting into his, what I call high earning years. He was just starting really to get traction in his business, and he was making lots of money. I said, look, you're going to be making more at 60 than you are today, or you can be making less. And he says, God, I hope more. Hopefully I'm more successful each and every year. That's the intent. I said, so why would you defer a tax today at maybe the lowest tax bracket you're ever going to see in your life, and pay taxes maybe at the highest tax bracket you're ever going to see in your life?
Yeah.
Just think about that from just that standpoint. Why does that make sense to anybody?
It doesn't.
It shouldn't, right?
No.
And there's a lot of excuses around why you should do it, because we can save, or we're for savings. Well, what if you could use that money to grow your business? What if you had control of that money instead of letting somebody else have control of that money? Because again, going back to that CPA that I talked to, he says, whoever controls the financing always wins. So you think about that. We're giving our money to somebody, and they're going out and they're buying these groups of stocks or bonds or whatever they're doing, these investments. Who's getting rich through that whole process? Are we getting rich as individuals, or are the money managers getting rich?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Ted Bena?
No.
So anybody that's listening to this podcast, I would challenge you to understand who Ted Bena is. And its last name is spelled Bena. And so Ted Bena, and I'm going to give you just a real quick synopsis so it doesn't drag out the podcast. He was, I don't want to say the founder, but he was the guy that popularized the 401k.
Okay.
So he was, and there was an article that was written September 26th of 2016. It's getting, it used to seem like it was just yesterday, 2016, but it's a little bit dated. But in this article, it kind of explains to what happened in September 1980, that he says, hey, there's a tax code, and we can get people to take a pay cut to put money into their plan, and then maybe the business matches it, and now you can force people to save for retirement. And to his credit, he was doing something he thought was a tremendous value, but it was always the unintended consequences that kind of crept up on him. And he actually came out and said that he created a monster. He made the point that he wished he never would have developed this or discovered this, because people took it wrong. And so the point being, and I'll have you go read that article. It says it was in Money Matters magazine. The investor of the 401k says he created a monster. That's the title of the article. And in there, he just talks about why he did what he did and what he thought he was doing was right. But what they kind of discovered was he created this monster that he wished he could take back. That was kind of at the end of the story, is that he wished he could kind of take it back and uninvent this or undiscover this idea, because all he found was a tax code that allowed him to do it. And then, so here's the funny part about it, and then I'll let you go read the article. He's like, the only way that happened was that he had enough connections so that he could make this thing work for his company. Again, it goes back to what Nelson was saying in his book, right? That the government creates a problem, and then they create these exemptions. Well, the only way you get an exemption is if you have enough people to lobby, or the right connections, or enough money to make it happen. And then for an individual, do you think that's you and I? You really believe that the 401k is set up for our benefit? It's not. The reason why companies do it is because it's a way to find people, but it doesn't force the company to be responsible for anything.
However, a lot of people have those expecting the company to fund them and provide for their retirement. So it's a really back-ass words way of planning for retirement, really.
Truly is. Because again, a couple of things there. We saw this in 2000. Companies can change the rules. Again, it's not me in control. It's the companies in control.
We saw that in 2020 with COVID too.
Right. They weren't matching them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they can turn that on and off. And so now you're at the mercy of these companies. The second one is it's the government rules. The government can change the rules anytime they want. They do it all the time. So now they're talking about how much you can put in. They're going to talk about possibly forcing the money out of taxation, or, there's just a lot of goofy thoughts in Washington about what you should do with your money. And because you're participating in a government-sponsored plan, you've said, yes, I'll take whatever rules you give me to do with it. You can do whatever you want with my money because I'm willing to play in your game. I hear it all the time. People say, hey, I got money in my 401k. I'm like, hey, that's great. You've saved all the positive things you've saved, you put money away, but you want to continue to do that. In the match, do a calculation. Understand how much the seen and the unseen fees are in 401ks. This is where I want you to do your own research. I'm not going to tell you not to do it in order to get the match, but I can do a calculation that will show you that at the end of the day, a lot of times the match that you get from your employer can equal, or maybe not even equal, the amount of fees that are being taken out by these management companies. And again, they'll post a fee in the prospectus for the 401k, but they're not showing you all the transaction fees and everything else goes along with it. There was actually an article in Forbes magazine that talks about the high fees that are being charged in 401ks. Now, again, that was all over the board. It's anywhere from 2% to 4.5% on an annual basis. And so they get 4.5% every time. When you do the calculation, the amount that they take in the form of fees is way greater than what you're getting from a match. Because a match.
Are you saying that it's not totally transparent?
I know most people are going to find that shocking, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to get down that side note, but there's a lot of information to understand there. But the biggest thing, it isn't about fees, it isn't about really anything there. It comes back down to more about control.
Yep.
The retirement trap, when we talk about government-sponsored plans, it's about control. Who controls your money and who gives you authority to use it? Here's a great example. I had a client, they'd taken a policy loan to do a remodel on their house for their child's graduation, graduating. So they wanted to remodel their house for graduation. So they had a small loan. It wasn't very big. They had a couple, $300,000 or $400,000 in their 401k, which is more than most people. Excuse me. And so what happened was they had this small loan to do this remodel. It was a small remodel. And they had it almost paid off. And they go, hey, we have an opportunity to buy a place down in Arizona, but they needed some additional dollars. So they wanted to take a loan from their 401k again, because in their mind, we have the ability to take money out of 401k through a loan, right? So it's the same process. Come to find out, they can only have one loan at a time.
Which is pretty
typical. Which is really typical, right? One loan at a time. And because they owed $2,000 left on this loan that they did 2 years prior, now they couldn't buy the retirement home in Arizona because they didn't have enough capital, because all their money was stuck someplace else that they couldn't control. But this is just a great example of who's in control of your money. If you're in control, then you have the responsibility and you have the ability to make those decisions. Again, that ability comes with some responsibility. You can't just spend like it's an open checkbook. You have to be an honest banker as well. But if we have the ability to have our money available to put it to work where we want it to work, then it has nothing to do with rates of return. It has nothing to do with this over that, or I can get a better return here. It's about control. And again, whoever controls the financing wins. And if we can control our own financing in our world as well as in other people's world, then who's going to be winning in those transactions?
Great.
And then so for those people that do have large accounts, and I've heard this before too, and maybe you have, well, I have money in my 401k. What should I do with it? And I don't know what you tell people, Nicole, but I'm like, hey, it's there. I'm not going to advise you to go do something really silly with it or stupid. You have to make that decision. And that's why I ask people to go do their own research. But take that. There's an article too, and again, I have to keep referencing other articles, but there's a common thought process out in the financial planning world that the 3% or the 4% rule for distribution used to be the key, right? We used to take 4% from your 401k and you'll be fine. And now it was interesting. Now there's an article by Michael Fink that he talked about the 4% rule being a bit of a folly. And now it's really the 3% rule. And what they're really saying is if I have $1 million, and I love it and hate it at the same time, there was a commercial out there that used to talk about what's your number? What's your number for retirement? Remember that?
Yep.
Everybody have their number. So let's pick out our number today as being $1 million. And what the 3% rule and what the 4% rule means is that whatever percentage you're going to use is that if it's used to be the 4% rule, that you have an 80% likelihood of success of pulling your money out using the 4% rule. What is that?
Not running out of money.
And that means what success means is that you have $1 at the time you die. That's success.
Right.
So you have a 20% chance of running out of money before you die in retirement. Again, what's happening with people, they're living longer and longer. So when do you want to learn that new phrase, welcome to Walmart, right? As a reader, when you're 95 years old?
Well, it's interesting. There's two things about that I think are kind of fascinating. So if you have worked hard and saved $1 million and now you're at retirement and we're telling you, let's just use 4%, even though it's pretty much invalid now. You can take $40,000 a year out of your account. Can you live on that? The second thing is, it's not very much. And the second thing to that is this 80% chance of success sounds really good. But what if you're the 20% that isn't successful? And, because it's not you're 80% successful. No, it's success or fail. You either have money or you don't.
Yeah. That's the whole point is like, do you want to control that function in your life? Do you want to give that? Again, we're abdicating it to somebody else to tell us how much money we can pull out of our system to live off of. And this creates tremendous scarcity. I can't tell you, I have some friends of mine that I know that I work through this process. And when the market is up, man, they feel positive. They feel empowered. They're okay to buy stuff. But as soon as the market hiccups a little bit, they completely stop spending. I want to buy a new boat. And I've had this boat for 20 years and market's up, so they feel good. And then the instant there's a 2 or 3 days downturn in the market, they're like, oh man, I can't afford to buy that boat. And now they're scared. And it's like, what an awful way to live in retirement.
Yeah.
Versus if I had the money in my control and I'm saying, hey, I'm putting my money to work and I'm controlling the banking function of my life and everybody else's, and I have passive income coming in. Again, you think about this from this standpoint, your banking system can be your first and greatest passive cash flow system that you'll ever have. Because all passive cash flow or passive income says is like, I don't have to go out and physically work for it. But if I can lend it out today and then somebody make payments back to me for the next 3 years, that's a great passive cash flow system, isn't it? Or whatever the terms are. So the point being is that when you're forced to that scarcity mindset, because now the market's down or whatever is negatively impacting your money, then you don't retire. You retire and you might say, I want to live my passive income years down in Florida doing whatever. But if you're afraid every day because the market changes, you don't live a real great life.
And if your idea was to retire and move into a position where you could do something that you enjoy, but now you feel like you have to go back to another job that you hate and you're probably making less money than you were before you retired, then that's not freedom either.
Right. No, absolutely not. There's a friend of mine by the name of Tom Hagna. He makes the point. He says, people at retirement, and again, he's talking about, he says, people at retirement. I'm not a big fan of retirement, but a lot of people are going there. A lot of people are there. So let's just go there. He says, people in retirement that have assets are miserable. People at retirement that have income are happy.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that several months ago, and that stuck with me because it makes, and everybody that hears that goes, yeah, I understand that. Makes sense.
Yeah. And again, having assets, if you have a piece of property that's cash flowing on a positive cash flow process, that's cash flow. It's an asset that's generating cash flow. What he's talking about is people that are in the stock market and have assets that you have to actually sell to consume. So that's the whole problem with the 401k is like, it makes you scarcity mindset to have to go save and go without, which, again, we're not saying don't do that. It's like, we need to reprioritize. But then when you get to this magical point, 65, 67 or 70, whatever it is, now it forces you to consume those dollars to live off.
Yeah.
Versus having a system that says, hey, we generated assets and now we'll give us positive cash flow. We don't have to consume what we have. And then you can pass that asset on to the next generation. So there's some real value there. So yeah, the whole retirement trap, I think we could spend hours talking about it because there's so much passion around it with clients. And you probably know that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a real thing. Everybody thinks about retirement, no matter where their income is. Everybody thinks about retirement.
Yeah. And there's some great resources talking, there's a gentleman by the name of Wade Borth. If people want to look him up, it's PFAU is his last name. And he does some tremendous research just on distribution planning and talking about how we get money out of our, where should we get our money from, how we should take it from distribution standpoint. And he's done a lot of tremendous research. And again, God bless those guys. They dig into the numbers and they spend years putting together research papers, which, I'm glad that they do it because I can read the final results and I don't have to go through that whole process. But
right.
you read their stuff, understand what they're saying. And there's a lot of good articles out there talking about, again, if we get away from the conditioned thinking, because anything sponsored by like Merrill Lynch, for example, or the big companies, what are they trying to do? They're trying to have you hold your assets with them so they can keep charging your fee each and every year. So that's their motivation. Wade's an independent researcher, and he's done a lot of work saying, hey, if you have money, let's make the best of what you got. And if you're going to take the money out, where else do you have other buckets of money? It just talks about, do you want a tax-free bucket of money, a tax-deferred bucket of money, or a taxable bucket of money? And I'm all about having as much in the tax-free bucket of money as I possibly can. And if we're doing it correctly, the properly structured life insurance policy, that's all tax-favored buckets of money. And again, I don't want to do things because of the tax code, because again, the government's going to change their mind. They're going to change what they want. And so doing it for the purpose of control of your money and being the one that can flow your money to where you need to be is way more important than doing it for any tax purpose. Because again, life insurance is favored because it's been around well before the tax codes. That's what people have to understand. That the modern tax code was put in 1913. And there's actually a really interesting book too, the Creatures from Jekyll Island, that kind of talk about the tax code and also talk about the central bank and how they can control people's money. So if you want a really good book, read The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's just really interesting to read about how the people of power and wealth of this country, their thought about how to keep their money and how to keep their power and their wealth was by making everybody else poor or keeping everybody else in bondage. It wasn't about creating more and making more. It was just about keeping everybody down. So what they had was always worth more. And and I think that happens quite on a regular basis, but that's probably a whole separate podcast as well.
Don't get me on a soapbox.
Yeah, exactly. If people want to know more, want to talk to us more about the retirement, I'm all for discussions around retirement. And again, is it retooling or is it just go sitting on a rocking chair? If you want to talk about retooling and want to do something maybe different at a later stage of your life and have passive income in order to do it, man, that's what we're all about. If it's about, hey, I want to retire and I want to do nothing at that time, I don't know that I can be of much help, because I think people are I think about the knowledge and the understanding of the world when you're 65 versus when you're 25. Why would you want that valuable person to be taken out?
Yeah.
All right. Anything else more about the retirement trap? I think this is a great chapter. There's a lot of good stuff, a lot of ancillary stuff we can add to it, because there's been a lot of research done around this whole subject from a lot of different sources.
And the only thing I want to add is that the question might come up, well, what does that have to do really with this infinite banking? But I think Nelson did a really good job of laying the foundation for another reason why being in control of your own financial system is more desirable and why that can benefit you more. I think it's a really good chapter. I learned a lot out of it. Again, it's short, 2 pages. It's not very long, but I learned a lot that I didn't know. And it really helped me put into perspective why I would think about doing my own financing system as opposed to depending on others for anything, whether it's financing or retirement, either way.
And I think, Nelson makes the point in the book, to just what you're saying there, is control your environment. You need to control your environment as much as you possibly can. And if somebody says, hey, I want to retire at age 65, and maybe they're 35 now, that's kind of their desire. Whatever they want to do, I'll say, hey, that's great. But between now and then, what are you doing to take control of your banking function? Between now and then, if we have those dollars that we're going to put aside, again, save and put in somebody else's pocket, why not keep it in your own pocket and develop a plan to grow wealth and grow passive income? So when you get to 65, you're not dependent on consuming, but rather taking advantage of passive income. And that's really what Nelson talks about. Is he's not saying, work at a coal mine your whole life, bust your back your whole life. He's saying, think about controlling the banking function in your life and somebody else's, right? This is his other customers in his store, right? If once you build and have these assets and you've taken control of the banking function in your life, then you're going to go find other customers. And those customers will actually come find you. And that's where you're going to build outside passive sources of passive income. That's really what he's talking about. And that's much more reliable than depending on the stock market or somebody else to tell you how much the 3 or 4% you can pull from those accounts. Yeah. And not run out of money. Get out of the consumer mindset and get into the business mindset.
Yep.
All right, Nicole, I appreciate your time on this. Appreciate your insight.
I appreciate this as well. It's always fun and interesting to just revisit this and look at it again and again. And you added a nice couple of notes there, things that I'm going to go look at and just add to the knowledge base.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will pick up our conversation and future podcast. We started talking about the rest of Nelson's book. So thank you again.
Great. Thanks, Wade.
Bye-bye. If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.